Apparently, the plan is to rise it until 68. What do you think to that? Time-wise, it's going to be perhaps middle of next decade. It wasn't supposed to be happening, by the way, until 2046. What do you think to this 68 to get your state pension?
Yeah, I think we should, and I think it's overdue. And like most of the changes that we make to these systems, it'll come later than ideally, even on that accelerated timetable, it'll come later than it would ideally be introduced for the benefit of society. These things will become increasingly unsustainable unless we work for longer. And the reason I say that is that your pension period was meant to be a relatively short time out to pasture and happiness after a working life. And no fault of theirs, of course, they grew up in the system, but we've had pensioners who've enjoyed, including my parents, who've enjoyed, a generation's worth of time in retirement, and the civil service have done well from the system. People of my age, increasingly middle age, have got to accept, and so I'm arguing against interest, right? We have to accept we need to work for longer. And if we're going to sell that to one another and to those who might not be inclined to, the argument might be made, it's not actually for you, it's for your children, grandchildren and for the society that's yet to come. Because if we're going to have a state pension age at all, it can't continue being at a set age when our life expectancy is going on and up and up.
Except if you're in Blackpool, as I was mentioning, some of the men there expected to live just until they're 67. Are you one of those guys? Are you in Blackpool? You read that. What do you make to that? You'll graft your whole life, potentially pass away before you even get your mitts on your state pension. Paul Embery, 68, the right age or not?
Well, my concern is, look, I'm not ideologically opposed to the idea that the state pension age should rise. I think there's a certain logic to what Alex says in the sense of if life expectancy is increasing, then I think there's an argument to say that proportionately the state pension age should increase as well. The difficulty that I have with it is I don't think it should ever be an economic consideration, actually. I think it has to be a consideration about life expectancy and people's health conditions and so on, what sort of level of health that they can expect at a certain age. Because I don't want to live in a society where we say, look, you can't draw a pension, not because you're not old enough, not because you're not infirm, but because, we're not prepared to tax richer people in order to pay for it. That's frankly why.
A state pension I'm talking about. You can get your own private ones if that's what you want to do.
Well, yeah, I know, but if you're not earning a great wage, then your private pension isn't going to be earning you a lot of money in retirement anyway. But coming back to the central point that Alex makes there, the truth is, and I would like to think he might even agree with me on this, over the last couple of years, we're looking at life expectancy going backwards. Now, the pandemic, has had some sort of impact on that. I think when you look at the very serious issue we've got at the moment around excess deaths and the fact that, we're having what seems to be a huge and very disturbing number of cases of cancer and heart disease and so on, then that bodes ill for the future. And I think the idea of the government saying now, when life expectancy in England certainly has dropped back over the last couple of years, and it may be the case for the rest of the UK, I'm not entirely sure, but against the backdrop of the chronic issues we've got in the National Health Service and healthcare generally at the moment and the excess deaths, saying that actually we're going to make you work longer and making that announcement now seems to be, in my view, very premature.
Well, it doesn't make people work longer. It's longer before they can draw their state pension.
Well, come on now. What does that mean for most people? What does that mean for a lot of people?
And the point I was going to make is that you raise very troubling issues about what's happened in the last year or two under coronavirus. Indeed, of course, last week we learned some 500,000 people should have gone on to blood pressure controls that didn't. 300,000 should have gone on to cholesterol reduction treatments and didn't because of the coronavirus environment. But the trend, and you look at these things in generational terms when deciding things like a state pension age or a state retirement age, the trend is very clear that our life expectancy, decade after decade, is going up significantly in this country, as everywhere else in the Western world.
Are you sure that that's going to continue, given what we've been through the last few years in this country, given the state of healthcare in this country? Are you really confident that's going to be the case in 10 years' time?
Yes, I think it's overwhelmingly likely. But even
why not wait until then before you make that announcement?
Because it will be the state using as an excuse something that's happened now to not do something it knows it needs to do already.
Well, it would be a legitimate reason, not an excuse.
No, you're not.
It would be a legitimate reason.
Forgive me, you're not listening.
I'm listening. I'm disagreeing with you. I'm listening very closely.
All right then.
I'm explaining why you're wrong.
Then perhaps you're not allowing me to finish a sentence when you would understand the point, which is that the gap between expectancy and retirement age has been clear now for a couple of decades. It's not something that we might just allow to catch up because we've had a coronavirus epidemic and life expectancy has been altered pretty marginally at the fringes of how you evaluate these things. It's seismic that we are retiring a generation earlier than our parents would have done in terms of our life expectancy.
The worst
coronavirus
time to make the announcement. The worst time to make this announcement.
Yeah, but I guess if you're a waspy woman, perhaps you'll be shouting at your screen because you've got to factor in the amount of time between now and your changes. Everyone's got a plan for these things. If you're a waspy woman, you will be shouting, and I hear you, that you weren't given enough time when it comes to planning for the change in the retirement age. One of my viewers just made a very good point as well. What about the type of work that you do, he asks, because, for example, I don't know if you're a labourer on a building site doing that kind of work until you're 68 versus, I don't know, sitting around here and talking for a living. They're two very different things, aren't they? It's one thing being alive. It's another thing actually having an active, mobile body that can do that heavy graft. Give me your thoughts anyway, the age of 68. Too high, too low, or just about right?